returning guest, Dr. Michael Lennox, who is a highly sought after astrologer and dream expert, a regularly featured expert on many television shows, including the Sci-Fi Network, NBC Starting Over, The Wayne Brady Show, and many others. Dr. Lennox is also the author of 2 incredible books on dreams. He leads workshops all over the US and conducts a worldwide practice based in Southern California. Welcome back to the Soul Collective, Michael. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Yes, we have so much to talk about. 2020 has been a roller coaster year, and there's so much to say, and I want to get into the astrology, but I first want to start with something that you mentioned last night. You know, I am an avid attendee of your Thursday night Dharma talks and astrology forecast sessions that you so graciously open up to your worldwide community every Thursday night, and offer so many insights. And something that you said last night really struck a chord with me. You said that you are fully ready to be selflessly holding space for the planet right now.
Wow. For your listeners, I'm tearing up. That just landed on me powerfully, and it was actually yesterday. It was a day and that evening, global healing meditation, where I was struck by that. And how it happened was I was just holding space, getting ready to start, and I was just in sort of quiet contemplation. The room was open. There were people falling in. I always open the camera up 10 minutes before so that people are there. I'm staging my apartment and people are watching this. And I was just being quiet in my preparation for doing this. It was my 14th hour of working. Thursdays are a long day. To hold space at 7 o'clock when I've started work at 5 a.m.
Wow.
And someone commented in on the bottom, on the chat, just something about my presence making her smile so big. And here it is again. It just made me cry because I had this profound sense of serving and a willingness to serve no matter what. 15-hour day, 16-hour day, I've committed to hold space on a Thursday evening. There are hundreds of people who respond to that call, and enough of them reaching out to me periodically saying, I look forward to this. And then it's like, well, can I possibly back up from something that I'm offering in service to the world if it is coming freely from me and being received so beautifully? This is why I'm here. Now, years ago, this felt relentless and awful and heavy, and I wrestled with it, and now I just don't. It is fully in my body that I am to serve, and some days that's relentless and exhausting, but it's always heartfelt and purposeful, and I don't feel like I have any other options, and fortunately, it also brings me joy.
Yeah. There are many things that I found really beautiful about that statement. One of them being the way that you are so, selflessly of service. And the other part of that is, I think, for myself and many listeners of the show, there is this deep desire to be of service and bring forward, gifts in the world. And I know that you've been doing this for a very long time. And I think, throughout our trajectory, throughout our journey, we go on this path of being of service in the world, and at the same time kind of opening up this internal parachute of, tending to our own well-being, our own health and healing, our own internal process. And then to be able to be at the point where you've expanded that enough, right? You've done enough of the inner work.
Done enough of the work. You're absolutely right. It overlaps our own trauma and need for approval, attention, and love and reflection also drives us to serve others. I serve you and you will love me. That's called trauma bond. But yet we have to serve to lift ourselves up and the planet up, right? Yes, it is a selfless act. And the selfless act of serving and the trauma of I give too much in order to feel more lovable is certainly something I had to work through. And there was just a point where they overlapped, and the trauma was healed enough, and the urge to serve, the drive to serve rose up. And it's just to me, it's a blessing of age.
Yeah.
Chronology. There's just things you can't do until you're older. And while you're younger, we're working through trauma. I have a level of self-actualization that's concomitant to being a man in his 50s who has spent decades of doing the work.
Right. And I think that's the key too, right? Because we could spend a lifetime or lifetimes not doing the work. And so I do want to ask you, what has been, some of the most pivotal practices in your journey? Has it been astrology, psychology? What have been, those cornerstones of healing?
Well, if it's, to me, it's it's like a linear journey, right? Where I think, you asked that question, and I think, well, the first thing I started doing as a kid was I learned about marinating in the dream world, and I was taught meditation at 15. I was taught Vedic meditation. So from the get-go, it was about being attentive to the subtle experiences that were intimate and internal for me. That's one of the reasons why I like dream work, is because dream work is purely intimate. It's self with self. There's no other, there's no judgment from the outside. It's just you being in relationship with your own insides. And so dream work might have been the first thing that rose up as powerful for me. But then as I got older and began to meditate with more discipline, it became meditation. And then when I discovered breath work in my 30s, it was like, oh my God, it's breath work. And so with each iteration of adding some discipline, it became that thing. And what's the blessing of having done a lot of seeking was I did a lot of finding. And so now I have a toolbox that I can grab anything that's right for the moment. And if I had to put any single one thing on top of the list of helpful tools and tips, it's breath. Because breath is how we are using the energy that comes into our body and we put out there. Like literal in and out of air in the lungs is also reflecting energy that we gather into our bodies and then put it out in the world in a creative act. And it's also at the place of breath where we first grab and hold back our fluidity because we're stressed or tense or anger or triggered in any sort of way. So if you were a fly on the wall in my home, you would see me actively deepening my breath on a regular basis throughout the day. And certainly when I'm teaching, one of the first things or last things I will leave with people is put a hand on your heart, a hand on your belly, and take a deep breath. The point is that you can do that at any given moment, in any given day, in any given state, and you will free the body from the grip of that state with that breath. You might have to repeat it 1,000 times in a difficult day, but breath is everything.
Yes, I love that practice. 2020 has been called the year of reckoning. I know in the United States, we're going through a Pluto return. Yep. We can talk about that a little bit, but what are some of the things that are coming up the most in your sessions, in your work with clients? What are some of the recurring themes that you're seeing?
I got to tell you something. I'm guessing the expected answer to that would be thematic to the year that we're in. But my actual experience with clients is just like ever, that people are struggling with their purpose, their job stuff, their intimacy, their relationship challenges. I personally am not working with a lot of people who are gripped by the reckoning. Which I think is fortunate for me, because I don't know that I could help somebody who's gripped by the reckoning. That's the story is so compelling out there, and attachment to story is, one of the killers of joy and spiritual flow.
Yeah, I was curious to see if grief was a recurring theme that you're working through right now, but it's not surprising to me that relationships and intimacy, given the fact that we're...
I would say that everything is the same on a human level. Like when somebody comes to me for a one-on-one session, even if they are gripped by their Facebook feed or, you know, the various conspiracy theories that are floating around. When they're showing up to me, they're getting down and dirty, and they're probably not talking about, you know, 5G or whether or not vaccines are, made by the devil.
Yeah.
But I think that one thing is absolutely clear about this year is that everybody is intensified in whatever the experience they're having. In my therapy practice, which is very, very small, but I do a little bit of psychotherapy. What I've been surprised by, Emily, is the amount of people that I thought were going to meet this moment in chaos and breakdown. Some of them have really pulled up into a higher level of functioning, reflecting the earlier work they've done.
Yeah.
It got heated up, and suddenly people that I thought would be in total fear are actually thriving because we're all being squeezed. And what comes out of us is the juice that's inside of us. And if we've been working on our consciousness, this moment has allowed a lot of people to up level how they're being with their own energy and embodiment.
Right? I know, it is amazing. It is striking to me how resilient the human spirit is. And, certainly, I didn't expect we would be quarantining, this long and, isolated in some senses. So it is amazing how we've collectively gone through this time. But, talk to me about you, expert astrologist, kind of coming into this year and going like, what is happening?
Wow. I will tell you that the language I used in 2019, that was appropriate language. Things like we've never seen before, chaos and challenge, great change, old structures breaking down. I mean, the language was accurate, but the level of intensity was just like, who could possibly have figured that out in advance? I will tell you that one of my dearest friends is also an astrologer, and she and I would talk a lot in January, especially as things, because we were looking at what was going to happen on the planet when the planet Earth, when the planet Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter all met up in January at the eclipse, first eclipse season of the year. And we would get on the phone every 2 or 3 days just cackling with the virus and the impeachment, and Australia almost burned off the planet, and Brexit had another kerfuffle. All of this was in January. And it's like the hype. I'm subject to hyperbole. I'm the guy who always speaks in overly dramatized words, and my words didn't match. For once, the world was more hyperbolic than I was.
It's very interesting because I'm flashing back to our conversation that was actually in January. And I remember the end of it, and you talked about fear that was kind of like coursing through and what was on the horizon. And I actually had no idea, that was before the pandemic. And so it was very prophetic words.
Well, and then to have the pandemic provide the crucible through which a racial injustice movement could rise up, which I was also talking about last year. I started talking about the Pluto return and the racism challenge in the United States in 2019, way before what happened with George Floyd. And that was another thing that Monique and I got together on the phone, cackling with glee, because she's one of the people I talk about this with publicly, because she's a Black woman, and I feel it's really important to, to lift up voices and have the world see a white dude and a Black woman, collegially talking about astrology and talking about race. But boy, that conversation in 2019 was nothing compared to the conversation about race in 2020. And so how can you not love what's possible of what's happening, even if the cost is a crazy, chaotic year where terrifying things are happening? But what's potential in rising up out of this is, I think, extraordinary.
Are we set for additional changes,
Oh, honey.
shakeups?
Oh, honey. We have not. I'm so sorry, but we haven't seen the peak of 2020's chaos. And frighteningly, or not for me, but for the world, the big peak is the first 2 weeks of November, which is concomitant with our election. So
Well, so
That's
everyone's talking about that. So let's just go there and give like a sneak peek of what's in store there. And I know, with you, and I do appreciate this about you, is that you balance everything with, such optimism and just, we will get through anything. So let's put that as a disclaimer.
yeah. And let me start by saying that I really believe that. Like, I really believe that. But
Yeah.
I also have to say that I am able to say that with the joy and the glee that does come out of me, because I'm not attached to the difficult circumstances that are arising and that will continue to arise, that allow for the change to happen. You've got to be comfortable with chaos or you will not make it. So let's start with that. The archetypes are clear in this journey. The Pluto archetype is the archetype of death, change, and transformation, right? That planet's got the most power and gravitas because it's the slowest body, right? The slower the body, the more power it has. The other archetype that's in the room is Saturn. This is where the reckoning comes in, that Saturn is the karma planet, the dude who invented that life is a lesson, right? So if life is a lesson and we're being tested, Saturn is in the room. So if you put these two planets together, sort of, I was calling it humorously in 2019, death and taxes. The two things are inevitable are death and taxes, and Pluto is death and Saturn is taxes. You pay the piper when Saturn is in the room. So they came together for the first time in 50 years in January. But more importantly than just their every sort of 50-year gathering is gathering in the sign of Capricorn. And this is where the shit hit the fan with the social structures, governmental structures, laws, all of the ways we make life happen through structure is a Capricorn invention. Mm. So when you have the planet of death and the planet of reckoning and lessons and taxes, if you will, coming together in a sign that we understand created structures like governments and laws and documents that say all men are created equal when that's not in fact the case. That's a Capricorn notion. So to have this gathering of planets come together in that sign broke down structures that we thought were not breakable. And what happens in November is, because of retrograde motion, those planets come back together again, kind of like they did in January. And so there's another big wave of energy, probably not as intense as January was astrologically, because that also included an eclipse, but chronology and life events count. Meaning right. We weren't in the mess that we are in now that in January. Yeah, we're in a big mess, and we've got 3 months till election to make even more of a mess. And so the coming back together of the death and reckoning planet, by the way, with Jupiter in tow, which is a benefic planet, he brings bounty and expansion, but he's going to make everything go over the top because he does that too. So that's the November wave. If you think of like January being a big boulder being thrown down into a body of water, creating a kind of tsunami effect, January, June, and November are the big heights of the wave created back in January. We're just coming out of the second one in June. And then we have this to look forward to in November.
Wow. Isn't it interesting that it's falling right during election?
You know, sweetheart, it's like you couldn't write this. You'd be like, yeah, it's too on the nose, too on the money.
Yep. Yeah, it is fascinating. You know, one of the things that stood out to me with what you're just saying is this theme of non-attachment. And I think with reckoning, 2020 is also such a theme of non-attachment. We're used to making plans. We're used to, 90-day plans and all of these things, and we're just not able to do that in the same way. Do you see us going back? Is this a phase that we're going through? And
truthfully, I think that the freedom that comes when you understand non-attachment is not something that's measurable by astrology or even sort of social constructs of wondering who out there is doing the work. I think it's interesting that before 2020, practicing non-attachment was sort of like, it was a hard game to play. You had to know a lot about yourself, and you had to be, free enough of trauma so that you're not triggered into action, that you could be triggered by something and say, okay, whoops, what's going on here? And let me sort of unattach myself from this expectation that's creating this trigger. But the whole world is now doing the triggering. Like it used to be, the triggers to not attach to was like your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your husband, your wife, and maybe, the news every once in a while. Now it's like every day, every news outlet, every, opportunity you have to see what's going on in the world is potentially triggerable.
It is such an incredible time for doing sort of collective shadow work, because there's just so many opportunities to really look at our own stuff.
Yes, and people capitulate to the drive and the reaction first, which means that before they even know it, they're posting a response to a Facebook post that they're seeing, and they're now the attachment is the unattachment is gone. You're off to the races. You're grabbed by the thing, and you're going to justify it to yourself by saying, "But they were wrong, and I had to teach them what was true." It's like, okay, did you teach them? Was that successful? No. Are you comfortable? No. So what has just happened here? You just dove into the shadow. So the trick is to feel the feelings of trigger and not behave and not act. That's how I do it. I get triggered. I've got a personality. I have an unconscious. I have opinions.
Let's talk about that with regards to kind of like the transition of the seasons. We're moving from Cancer season to Leo season as we record this. So tell me a little bit about how that plays into the subconscious.
Well, we move from the moon to the sun, right? The Cancer season is ruled by the moon's consciousness of cycles, mystery, things that are hidden, and the archetype itself of Cancer is engaged with what's at home, where's the hearth, how were we born and cared for and nurtured. So if the world is triggering, we've already established that the world is very triggering. If the world is triggering and the mansion we're in is the one that's the most emotionally tender, the easiest to be triggered into sadness and despair, then our trigger response from the world is much more likely to be debilitating emotionally. And I think that was certainly happening last month. I certainly heard from lots and lots of followers and clients that they just couldn't stop crying, and their emotional response to the world was more vulnerable. Leo is ruled by, it is, the ruler of the sun. Now we're not at home licking our wounds. We're like out in the world being big, bold, self-expressed, in leadership, in creativity, joy, and play. That's the nature of the Leo mansion. And ruled by the sun, which is the center of our existence, of our consciousness itself. So I think what's happening is, for some people in Leo mansion, there'll be more personal freedom, because there won't be the same amount of overwhelm that keeps us in a place of like, oh my God, I've got to take care of myself. I can't possibly meet the world on the world's terms. Leo mansion should help a lot of people meet the world more, I don't know, assertively, energetically, and more creatively. So we're less likely to fall into emotional despair. I would say that Mars, the planet of the planet that can include anger and war and aggressiveness, moving into Aries, is an interesting fire energy to match the fire of Leo. Leo is a fire sign. So you can also expect through the Leo mansion more anger, more expressions of the rageful kind.
So Mars being in Aries for an extended period of time.
Yes, an extended period of time.
Going
so the
retrograde.
End of the year and into January, he usually spends 6 weeks in a sign, but he's going to retrograde.
Yeah, and so that sort of is accentuated the feelings of maybe fieriness, somewhat
I've noticed I am very into my physical fitness. It's part of my spiritual practice. And it's also in my genetics. My mother was insane with her physical fitness expression, and that got passed on to her children. Um, the moment Mars moved into Aries, my working out energy got like crazy on fire.
Yes, same.
Crazy. Yeah. I love that. So there's tremendous positivity that can come from Mars being in a sign that tends to bring up more aggression and fiery energy, for certainly the benefits of passion, goal attainment, the physical body itself being energized. The the same placement, though, is conducive to that fire of Aries sort of lighting you up in reactivity. And so we want to be watching out for that.
Right, right. And we're seeing sort of like a lot of squares
Yeah.
astrologically coming up to kind of heighten that. But then also Mars, from what I understand, helps us with change, helps us with that transformation process in a really beautiful way.
It is the way we embody the changes that have occurred.
What do you mean by that?
Change happens and we have to behave differently. Now, if the change happens and we resist the new behavior, right, then we're not allowing it to be embodied into our sort of movement through life. It's kind of like an abstract word I use to sort of describe a person's ability to move and choose behaviors from a higher place in their consciousness and not unconsciously. So if we are moving through life and life is causing us to have to choose and behave differently, that's Mars. Mars is how we understand making choices of behavior. And so if the world is changing as it is, then each of us have to learn how to make new behavioral choices. Like we talk about fitness, like I had to reinvent how I figure out my fitness experience. If I can no longer go to the gym, if I can't belong to a CrossFit community, I had to respond to that. In some ways, Mars entering Aries was the first time I felt the same amount of power in my body in my living room that I did in the gym.
So interesting.
Because I embodied it took a few months, but I embodied the consciousness of moving my body through space in a powerful way that I only could associate with that space, the gym space, not my living room. This is a sort of a very paltry example, but hopefully it makes some sense. And you can use the same example for how to be with the emotional experience of taking a hike and watching people wear masks or not wear masks based on what you think you should be wearing a mask or not wearing a mask, right? And so suddenly, I think the change of how to be in that experience with Mars and Aries is going to help people with their reactions to what they're being asked to shift and change in their lives. To, that retrograde motion that's coming up is like a visit into the little unconscious territory. And so Mars in that territory through the rest of the year is going to be assisting us with how to be in a world that we want to be angry at, but somehow not get angry at and switch into that sort of transcendent function of what happens when we stop resisting and we let go of the anger and we radically accept the changes that are happening. So that radical acceptance of change is like an embodiment. We embody the idea that I accept these changes. So Mars is how we fix our embodiment or adjust our embodiment. And the squares you mentioned are the geometry that Mars is making with the planets that represent the change and transformation that's happening. Squares are conflict energies. So we're going to bump into all of this for the next 6 months. But by bumping into it, change is possible if you're approaching your life with some consciousness.
And that's one of the most beautiful things that I appreciate about astrology is even these really seemingly challenging aspects, whether they're in our charts or whether, it's something that we're going through collectively, they all have the opportunity to be such positive forces for change and transformation in our life. All depends on how we're working them, right?
It all depends on how we're working it. I had the great fortune of learning every humility lesson that I've learned through the process of humiliation. Because I had a lot to heal. I had a lot of rage, I had a lot of trauma. So as I moved through my 20s and 30s, my greatest lessons were through the adversity of bumping into my own sort of self-destructive behaviors. As a result of that, I have in my skin the understanding that if you move through a really, really dicey, scary, overwhelming moment that maybe you've even created, that great benefit comes from that. So do not shrink back from scary territory, scary emotional territory, or scary psychological territory, because I've been down the road of doing the worst, stupidest things and creating horrible destruction, and then moving through that and creating change, transformation, and healing through the same things. And that's what we're being asked to do on a global scale right now. And not everybody has practice with that.
Right. Well, let's talk about that from a personal level of like just understanding your chart. Would you say, like, when you look at your chart, for example, are there a lot of challenging aspects? Do you look at people's charts and say, well, oh, that's pretty like easy chart this time around? This is a really hard one. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've looked at charts and said, yeah, those very things. And because there is the energy in the chart expresses, like, that's the beauty of having read thousands and thousands of them. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that astrology charts reflect the people, because I've looked at it empirically many, 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 many times. Certainly in my own chart, I have what's called a cardinal grand cross. It's a big set of squares, right? And a lot of them, and it's very intense in my chart, this big cardinal cross. And so any chart with a lot of squares in it means that person's going to have a lot of conflict and obstacle to move through. But squares in a natal chart turn out to be skills if you move through the lessons effectively. So as one example, my chart has Saturn and Neptune in a square. That means my karmic journey and the lessons that I was here to learn, Saturn, are in conflict with my spiritual connection, Neptune. That means I struggled my entire early life in this square, a desire to know God, but a desire to be human in my foibles. And those two desires bumped up against. So addiction was a big part of my journey, because Neptune also rules addiction. So Saturn and Neptune I found God most easily when I was younger through drugs and alcohol. Fortunately, I got clean very early, and I spent a few years that way. And then I did a visit into my addiction in my 30s, which was brutal. Saturn square Neptune. But I leaned into those lessons enough to transform that experience. And now, as a man who is, chronologically decades away from that trauma, and having done more and more and more and more and never ending work on self, that square between my teacher archetype of Saturn and God archetype of Neptune is a great skill of how to teach and tap into spirit at the same time.
Yeah.
Partly because I've been through the ringer and I know the pitfalls of the not doing that, so that I can teach how to do that with more personal experience of it. And then I'll just add this one last little thing. There's a beautiful grand water trine in my chart. That water is feminine energy, it's fluid energy. It's got a gentleness and a lovingness to water. And the trine in my chart includes my north node of Dharma, my destiny, my Chiron in Pisces, so my ability to be in a spiritual place with the concept of healing and being a healing presence, and that Neptune in Scorpio. So I have it in me to have this beautiful, kind, loving, healing beautiful energy. But I couldn't put those two together. The cardinal square in fire and air was all masculine, all fiery. And that feminine, soft energy, I couldn't be with both until way, way, way later in my life, because the water just got drowned out by the fire.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting how we can move through those throughout the course of our lives, right?
I did the work and I was able to integrate. Now both patterns fully exist in my day-to-day experience, and there's integration. But the chart, now, I don't know that I could have figured this out in advance by looking at the chart, but I can certainly backward interpret, oh, my process was just having these two patterns, a very masculine way of being in the world and a very feminine way of being in the world. They did not match or mix or meld or work well together for the first 25, 35 years of my life. But now they work like a beautiful, precise machine, allowing me to be both in my sort of fiery masculine energy, but also have this lovely softness and that people seem to feel.
What a beautiful example of really doing the work and understanding your chart, being able to really bring it forward and integrate all of your gifts. I have a question on a sort of selfish note. So if you saw several planets in the 12th house.
Ugh. That you?
Yeah.
You describing your chart, honey?
Yeah.
You want to say more before I launch into how difficult that is?
Is it?
Well, it's beautiful. Like everything in the world, and of course everything in astrology, everything has a blessing and a challenge, right? So I'll start with the blessing. The blessing of 12th house. Well, first of all, let's, for those who are listening who don't know this, the 12th house in a natal chart is the house of the unconscious. It's the last house. The first house is the first house of self, of like conscious awareness. And the 12th house is the source energy, the connected energy, the void energy that we all are in the undifferentiated state. So it's a powerful, powerful house, because it's through that house that we connect to dreams, the unconscious, our mystical energies, any God consciousness that we have comes to us through the 12th house. So to have planets in there is a great blessing, because it sets you up in your blueprint to have easier access to the invisible realms, because part of your consciousness is living in the invisible realms. So that's the blessing. And there's an attractiveness that a person with certain 12th house placement can have, because other people will respond to someone who has 12th house placement, sort of feeling the energy of that planet in a way that they can't codify necessarily, but they might be drawn. So many people with 12th house placements have a level of attractiveness, energetic attractiveness. I mean, you're attractive in a purely physical way, and that's not your 12th house consciousness. That's, good genes and great bones, and thank you, mom and dad. But an energetic attraction that you might move through the world could be described by having 12th house planets. The challenge, of course, with 12th house planets is that whatever planets are in there are also debilitated to your conscious awareness, because part of their energy will never be available to, like on the desktop of your consciousness that's in there.
Yeah.
I think when I see somebody with 12th house placements, especially if the sun is in there before a session, there's a little part of me that goes, nah, oh well. It's never really as hard as I think it's going to be, but it is a different experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
What planets do you have in the 12th house, honey?
My son.
So think about that, honey. The sun is the brightest light in our experience. It's bright, 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 burn, 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 burn. And it's the I am Emily. The I am Emily, on fire, lit up, burning, is in the house of your unconscious. That means that vibrant light is being diffused out into the world through the beautiful waters of your unconscious experience. So other people look at you and they're like, wow, she's sort of glowing. That energetic glow. Again, I'm not talking the physical. I mean, the experience of how people might perceive your looks. But the people that I know with Sun in the seventh house definitely draw people toward them in a more mysterious way,
Hmm.
in some fashion.
Yep.
It's perceivable.
So I also have Mars and Venus in the 12th house. So, lots of fun work to do, but it
Don't even
just,
think about that right there. Mars is how we choose and decide. Your best way of accessing your choosing, deciding masculine principle of I make a decision, I make something happen is best attained or connected to by you through meditation or quietness or leaning in. Like you're not gonna 12th house Mars, you could never be a person who acts first and then figures it out.
exactly. That's so true. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the season of action and creating and passion that we're in with Leo season. One of the questions that I have for you, one of the themes that seems to be, pressing I know there are many this year, but it is this theme of narcissism. And I was curious to you if you feel like through Leo season, this being about performing, if that might be accentuated in any sort of way.
Well, absolutely. That in terms of the archetype of Leo and the quality of narcissism, Leo invented it, right? So that if and we are in a moment where it's like we are facing the cult of narcissism, and that's really white privilege, white men, white male European colonization consciousness is pure entitlement and pure narcissism, right? That idea, eminent domain. I'm white, I have a ship, you're brown, I win. Right? So we're living in a world created by that. Like I know a lot of people think, oh, it's in the past. Can't we be done with that? It's like, no, we can't. That's what created us. We got created through that lens. And now we have a president who has narcissistic personality disorder. Like he literally has something you could diagnose in the realm of narcissistic expression. America is a narcissistic country. We run around the world saying, you got to do it our way. We are doing all of the things that we're complaining shouldn't be done, but we do that out of narcissism. And so in a moment where that's what's up on the planet to be transformed, certainly a passage through the Leo mansion has an opportunity for anyone grappling with narcissism to do some work on it. I don't think Donald Trump is likely to be responding to Leo season's opportunity for him to do a deep dive and explore his narcissism. But those who want to
have that opportunity.
Well, yeah. It's kind of like this. It's like if you have an issue with self-care, I would say do the best work during the Cancer Mansion. And then if you've got challenges with narcissism, either from the inside out or the outside in, like that, you are the narcissist, or maybe you're the empath who's still stuck in the problem is the narcissist, because that's the empath heals when the empath recognizes that the narcissist wasn't the problem, but rather the trigger that allowed them to do their healing.
Yes.
That work is best done in the Leo mansion. Now, having said that, does that mean that you shouldn't do that work in like October or May? Right? So it's abstract on the one hand and literal on another hand. I don't know if literal is the right word, but you see what I'm saying? It's like
we always have the opportunity, but we could especially
like
take
intention setting. Yes, we set intentions on the new moon, but does that mean that's the only time we set intentions?
Exactly.
Right. So I think that there are certainly people who will follow the mansion movement and be in enjoyment of the idea. Okay, we're in the Leo mansion. What can I work on? Right. And in every Leo mansion, we have an Aquarius full moon. And the Aquarius archetype invented care for all. No one supreme leader, all in a beautiful communal circle. Is an invention of the Aquarius archetype. And the Leo full moon asks us to integrate what's good for the self and the personal sense of sovereignty and leadership so that I might care for the world. Like, so it is built into the Leo mansion to have the possibility of tempering and healing narcissism, because every Leo mansion has an Aquarius full moon that asks us to consider how we lead, but then care for all. So that happens every year.
Michael, what are some activities that we could be partaking in to really celebrate Leo season?
The beauty of that question is anything that brings you joy. Leo invented joy, creativity, creative expression, children, sex, play. All of the yummy aspects of being in a body are an invention of this mansion. And what's one of the things that people stop doing when they're stressed? They stop playing. What a great month to be re-exploring what gives you joy, what little thing is, yummy to you, what creative expression that you might have played with once. Get out those art supplies. If you're somebody who has colored pencils in your closet, get them out. You have no business not playing with your crayons if you have crayons.
I love that. And you're right. Like, what a nice break from the intensity of 2020 in the sense of, we're gearing back up to November's, whatever November has to entail, but we have this season of play.
Yeah. It's also a milder season astrologically in terms of other transits that we're grappling with. In fact, in some ways, August, because Mars doesn't go retrograde till September, and that's one of the next sort of big kerfuffles is Mars turning around, and the eclipses are behind us, and so is Venus is retrograde and Mercury's retrograde. So once we get further into Leo season, we've got a month where we're not hitting any other major astrological bumps in the road. So it does lend itself to having there be more spaciousness to be playful and creative. And if nothing else, it's a good idea to play with this just to remind ourselves that our personal experience within our skin and our bodies does not have to be determined by what's happening out in the world. You can close the door, get out your colored pencils and draw something pretty just because you can. And that will remind you that the inside of your body is as much the experience of your life as the outer world that you move through.
What great advice. Let's talk a little bit about planning ahead. I'm going to bring it back to the non-attachment theme with so much retrograde energy that we've been, moving through. And, I know just talking to a lot of clients, it can be a challenging time to feel like manifesting abundance and bringing something forward into the world, like what advice would you have to really plan around everything that's happening right now?
Wow. Well, I think the first sort of answer to that question that bubbles out of me is that though everything is changing, also nothing is changing, meaning you in a body in your life we still create our lives by setting intentions. We still have to have a vision of where we're going and be flexible and tenacious at the same time. We still have to check in with where we feel we don't deserve something that we desire and create. It's kind of like when you asked me earlier about like what's rising up in clients, and my answer was, well, nothing new, just more intensely. In some ways, my answer to your question is the same, that it's a trick of fear a little bit to think, oh my God, I have to do it differently now that the world is changing, and I don't know what that means, so I must be behind the eight ball. The world's landscape is changing, but how to stay connected to yourself with self-care hasn't changed. how to investigate your traumas and heal them, whether it's through, writing processes or emotional experiences or therapy, or like that hasn't changed. The idea of creating goals and visions and then making action plans, that hasn't changed. What maybe changes what's possible. Like, I wouldn't start a catering business this year.
Right.
Right?
And I think
that
also,
might change.
Right. You're absolutely right. And I feel like there is this theme of internal process this year. Like I almost imagine this year as being like this gigantic cocoon that we're all in, like in the void of really just working on ourselves, doing the inner work, understanding what we're going through is reflected in the collective experience as well, and being able to really balance that also with what we want to bring forward into the world.
I think it's important in a moment like this to also just acknowledge that many people are having experiences of guilt that they're doing better than somebody else. The social media bubbles that we create. My social media bubble means that everybody's working on their spiritual practice and expanding their lives in an internal way. And but I also had to unfollow about 300, 400 people over the last 4 months who follow me because they're conspiracy theorists. And I'm of the belief that if you're chasing conspiracy, you're just trading one set of illusion consciousness for another. And the spiritual path is designed to wake us up to our oneness with God. And if you're going to fight with a conspiracy, then you're in the illusion consciousness. So I think that I think I might have lost my train of thought.
Yeah, me too. For a second there, I went right with you to the conspiracy theory, and I was.
Yeah. That's where I got. I gotta stop my.
But I think there is.
Okay, the point I got there. Now I remember the point I was trying to make. Don't feel bad if you still have a job. Don't feel bad if your business is thriving. Don't feel bad if you're not one of the people who's being destroyed in their lives by this pandemic. Now, if that's you, you're probably not listening to this podcast. And there are people who really are suffering greatly. And your job, you being random listener to this podcast, is to take whatever your experience is and lift your life up and have a magnificent experience of what you are here doing, attempting, and desiring, because that heals the planet, right? My business is thriving during this because I'm a spiritual teacher who helps people through chaos, and chaos has risen up, and I know what I'm doing. And so my business is flocking. People are flocking to me, and it's all increasing. Imagine if I didn't feel like I deserved that because people have lost their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not dismissive of the experience of the person who's really suffering for me to continue to enjoy the up-leveling of my business as a spiritual teacher, because I know that if I'm operating at the highest level of vibration that I can, and I'm serving humanity while I do that, then I'm helping the planet rise up its vibration. And I don't have to feel guilty that I'm not suffering at a greater, level.
I do think that right now, those who are committed to service and living a life of intentionality and purpose will be blessed, more than ever before. It might take, different paths and
yes,
timing
and
for that.
frames, but it is through that act that we grow and are able to create more, because it's I don't know, it's just an energetic flow. It's the way energy is supposed to flow. Now imagine if everybody on the planet understood serving others. Yeah, we wouldn't have war, we wouldn't have breakdown, everybody be fed. So if that's true, like, let's just pretend that that's true as an abstract. If everybody on the planet understood service and served, even in the tiniest little ways, and then we'd have no breakdowns and no challenges. So then if that's true, then what's your job now? Is to do the most you can and serve.
Yes. Yes.
Trusting that eventually more and more and more people will do this, and that's what creates peace for humanity. One of the ways that I'm able to have the hope that I have is because I think generationally. I'm not thinking about, you know, how the world's going to be in 5 years. We're not going to have peace for humanity in 5 years or 10 years or before I die. But I think generations from now, the world will transform itself as it always does. And what we do now does impact what the future is creatable as. And so the more people on the planet who are knowing what they bring and who they are, and then bringing it to the world, help and assist people in the future doing the same.
What can we be aware of in terms of relationships right now? Are there any themes that we are witnessing?
What an interesting question. You know, the Venus retrograde that we're just coming out of, she's almost done with the cycle. She's not backwards anymore. There's a thing called the retrograde shadow, the last act, the third act, when she's covering territory that she's now covered 2 other times. And this ends in a couple of days, right? So we're just coming out of like a 2.5-month period of explorations about how we give and receive love. So the fact is things have changed about how we give and receive love on a personal level because Venus went retrograde. So what's interesting about your question is that it sometimes takes, you know, time after the shift has happened energetically to see how we're showing up differently. And so one thing I would encourage people to do relationally is to look for how things feel different in the room, in your intimacy experiences and your intimate conversations and your challenges towards getting more intimate with your beloveds. I promise you, stuff's changed, but you can't notice those changes if you're moving too fast out of habit and reacting to your partner in the way you always did, perhaps, or you know, playing out the patterns behaviorally without adjusting them. It's a good moment to ask yourself what has changed, because I trust that Venus's retrograde did shift things, but sometimes we won't know how until we practice it in the room.
Right.
So what I'm asking people to do is to pay attention over the next month or 2 about intimacy experiences, because if you can't notice that something has shifted, then you're not living on this planet. Like, everybody has shifted in how they give and receive love over the last 3 months. Now spend the next month or 2 curious about how that might be showing up in your process.
Yes, fascinating. That, in addition to the fact that Mars is in Aries, which may give rise to certain, you know, conflicts or tensions, that on top of the fact that if you're quarantining with somebody,
that's right.
6 months straight with them. And
so Mars in Aries is very clear about what it wants. And most relationship and intimacy experience is a negotiation around who wants what and how does that work for the other person. So suddenly you've got a mind and a heart experience that's changed because Venus and Mercury both went retrograde kind of at the same time. And now with Mars going retrograde and in Aries, people are going to be clearer about, I want this or I want that. And so that can be done beautifully and intimately and more effectively emotionally because Venus and Mercury just went retrograde and came out of that retrograde. So as this sort of speaks into what we talked about Mars's retrograde helps us embody the changes that have already happened. So as Mars goes retrograde over these next 6 months, different ways that we have learned about what we need emotionally or desire romantically because Venus went retrograde, the confidence of asking for what you want that Mars in Aries can bring will work together with the shifts and changes in our hearts and our minds that have taken place. It is absolutely possible that over the next 6 months, many people will have a deeper and richer experience of their intimate relations if they do the work, trusting that change has occurred.
I love that. What a beautiful gift and way of looking at things. I also, as a final thought, I know we're running out of time. I could talk to you for hours, but I've heard you talk about this shift from really the head to the heart and body.
Mm. There's a much bigger um, magnetic field that emanates out of the heart than the brain, by like 80% larger. We think of the brain as the center of everything because we're so fascinated by the brain. It's like an amazing organ, and it is the organ of life, the organ of consciousness, the organ of God. I mean, it's an amazing thing. But in that mind is this, voice that tells us who we are, tells us where we are, tells us when we are. And it is not part of the organic experience. I sometimes will put this through the lens of astrology. Like the sun is the center of consciousness. Like, does it not know who it is? It does. It burns. It's like there's no question in the sun's mind of who and what it is. And then the first planet around it is Mercury, this tiny little planet that zips and zips and zips and is talking constantly. Hey, sun. Hi, sun. I see you. I'm here. I'm here. What do you think? What do you think? Where are we going to go today? What are we going to do? Who are you? Oh, blah, blah. That's who we think we are. But that's just the chatter that's like navigating the experience. Like it's just telling us to, look both ways before we cross the street. But we attach more meaning to what our mind thinks. And what can the mind do that's disastrous for us? It can think about the past, and it can think about the future. That's the difference between the sun consciousness and Mercury consciousness. The sun just burns. That's who we are. Mercury is our mind telling us about tomorrow and yesterday, tomorrow and yesterday, tomorrow and yesterday. The heart does not know tomorrow. The heart does not know yesterday. There's no time in the heart. There's only the present moment. And the intelligence then of the heart is the ability to know in a moment that, is this moment a yes? Is it a no? Am I safe? Am I not safe? Am I making a decision that serves me? Am I making a decision that doesn't serve me? Fully and totally in the moment. So the idea of dropping the heart down into the mind is a congruence of, I don't think too much about where I'm going. I just use my thoughts to make sure I don't get hit by a car when I cross the street. The heart center says, am I on the right street?
Yes. Yes. Such beautiful words and wisdom. Thank you so much, Michael. Where can people go to connect with you?
I am on Facebook and Instagram, and I have a website. The website is michaellennox.com. Instagram is Dr. Lennox Dreams, DrLennox Dreams. And then Facebook, it's Dr. Michael Lennox.
Yes. And for everybody out there listening, follow Michael on Instagram. I watch his daily astro forecast every morning when I wake up. You kind of tell us what's happening in the world, what we should be tuning into, and just so much.
Every day, don't miss a day at 5:30 in the morning, usually in my red robe.
Yes, love it. So thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for your service. And it's always a pleasure connecting with you.
Thank you for having me.